What does Labour want to see from the Prime Minister's unlock roadmap tomorrow? Would you like precise dates for various unlocks and precise details, precise numeric targets, for example, that the government or the country must reach first before we go through the stages?
Tom, look, I think the starting point is that the Prime Minister's got to tread carefully and cautiously. He's got to listen to the science. It would be helpful if he published the data so that the public can understand his thinking. I think we all want to see the country open up, but what we want to ensure is that this is the last lockdown that we've had, so we can't move too quickly. We've got to make sure that this is the last. And what we've seen previously is last year that he said the lockdown we had for the first time would be the last. It wasn't. We then had two more. And of course, at Christmas, he said that we would be having a Christmas. And then, in a sense, Christmas was cancelled because he did a last minute U-turn. So I think the important thing is to follow the science, to do this with measure, and to understand also that you've got to be listening to business. So if there are to be restrictions in place in parts of the country, we do need business rate relief for businesses, and we do need a VAT holiday for the leisure sector and hospitality sector particularly.
We'll hear about that from the Chancellor, perhaps or perhaps not the following week. But do you go along with Tony Blair's plan, your eminent former leader? I think you've served in his government for a little while, to link stages of unlock to numeric targets. For example, Tony Blair says non-essential retail shouldn't open unless new cases are less than 50 per 100,000. And for hospitality to reopen, they must be less than 10 to 100,000.
Well, what we saw before is that the tiered system imposed huge restrictions on a lot of people and didn't contain the virus. So it was useless. It also didn't work regionally because the government refused to listen to regional leaders like Andy Burnham and Sadiq Khan. So if we're to have a tier system, he's got to listen to what's being said regionally. I've heard about Tony Blair's scheme. It sounds a lot more detailed, a lot more transparent, and the public can be clear. So I'm sure there's merit in it. We'll have to see what the Prime Minister comes forward with. But clearly, he will have to have a better plan than he had last time round.
But what's the better plan that you're proposing? Do you want specific moments of unlock to be linked with specific data?
As the official opposition, we have not got the data that the government have got. So it's not for us to announce an alternative scheme. It is for us, once we have the published data from SAGE, to understand the government's thinking. But what we're clear on is that we will follow the science. We would tread cautiously. We will be listening to science, but we would also be listening to business.
Okay, you've said that. I mean, Tony Blair has gone a bit further than you, but I accept. I had a funny feeling you would revert to that position. So let's move on a little bit. This morning, you're highlighting a huge case backlog in the Crown Courts. It's hit an all-time record of more than 56,000 cases now. But your argument is interesting. It's not just this is all down to COVID and the pandemic, you say. You say it's also a result of underinvestment in the Ministry of Justice for a decade. You are piling on Tory rule on top of COVID here.
Absolutely. Our courts are in a dire state with a backlog of over 56,000 cases. But look, let's be clear. There was a case involving a paedophile, a man who molested a 12-year-old girl who walked free a few weeks ago. A case involving an individual who had a speed chase with the police who walked free. We've got serious criminals and we've got victims now who would want to give evidence, but they may not see their cases for 3 to 4 years. The truth is there were problems in our justice system because, frankly, the Ministry of Justice and our courts bore the brunt of austerity over the last 10 years. So we've had a lack of investment in our courts. We've had a reduction in the amount of days that the government are prepared to fund our courts to sit. And what it means, I'm afraid, is we are very, very unlikely over this over the coming months and years to be anything near tough on crime
Mm.
that people need to see in their local communities. So that's why I'm saying we do need to bring forward the 200 Nightingale courts that was promised by Her Majesty's Court Service at the beginning of this crisis. And we do now need wartime juries. I'm repeating the call of the Lord Chief Justice
Mm.
so that we can get at least another 15% capacity so we can deal with that backlog.
I
But I
understand.
have to tell you, Robert Buckland is missing in action, and there is a catastrophe looming for our country, for people seeking justice and for victims of crime.
Yeah, but as you say, he has already announced new Nightingale courses this week. You'd like to see them. The thing about what
Tom,
you're saying
let me
is,
just say, Tom,
hang on, let me just
it's
put this question to you.
pathetic. He's announced 23 Nightingale courts,
Okay,
nothing like the 200 that was necessary.
let me put this to you. You haven't produced huge amounts of empirical evidence that this huge backlog has anything to do with the Tory government's rule over the last few years, and not just down to COVID. And my question to you is, do you not run the risk of appearing to voters just a little bit opportunistic, jumping on the pandemic to slap the Tory government for every sin you can possibly think of? And we know they don't react too strongly to people opportunising the pandemic.
I've got to tell you, Tom, there was a backlog before the
How
pandemic.
big was it?
There was a crisis in our courts and our justice system before the pandemic. We've had advice deserts across the country because of severe cuts in legal aid before the pandemic. We had a reduction in sitting days that our courts could sit before the pandemic. Look, we want to support the government where we can, but on matters of crime, assault, rape, murder, we've got to be deadly serious. And victims of crime are now suffering. Prosecutions are down in our country, a very, very worrying trend emerging under this current government.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Keir Starmer's speech. Now, I think it's fair to say it didn't have the universal reaction from the commentariat that perhaps the Labour leadership and his advisors really wanted. But the Labour narrative appears to be, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, that it doesn't matter if you're behind in the polls now, and it doesn't really matter if you're not getting the audience or the hearing perhaps you think you deserve, and maybe you do, because you point to World War II and you say Winston Churchill was ahead during World War II, but Clement Attlee went on to win the 1945 general election. We keep on hearing the Clement Attlee analogy. In your view, is Keir Starmer the modern day Clement Attlee?
I mean, Tom, I don't recognise what you've just said. This was a bold speech that set out the contours of a Labour approach to the economy. It basically said that we do believe in the state and the power of the state working alongside business, that we can either go back to life before the pandemic, and that means life where 30% of our children are in child poverty, where the north-south divide is bigger than at any time since the First World War, where we're not prepared to support young people on free school meals during our holidays. We're prepared to cut the benefits, universal credit, of the poorest in our country and not give people the £20 uplift. And we're prepared to freeze public sector pay. The Labour Party does not support that.
I
We
understand that.
believe that Attlee vision of a welfare state that set a bold vision for this country is absolutely the right one. And we must be supporting business. And supporting business means business relief. It means a VAT holiday for the tourism and leisure industry. That's the kind of vision that Keir set out. It was absolutely the right one. And I think that that's why people have welcomed it. I also think, by the way, that when you consider where we were a year ago, the worst defeat since 1935, this leader has done phenomenally well to get Labour a new hearing with the public. And we are still on a journey to be trusted, to be listened to. And of course, we've got until 2024 to set out our platform for the next general election.
You might do, but Boris Johnson is going to reform the fixed terms Parliament tax. I wouldn't necessarily bank on that. I also note you didn't take the opportunity to announce Keir Starmer as a modern day Clement Attlee. Would you like to do that?
Keir Starmer will stand in his own shoes.
Okay.
But the vision of Clement Attlee, which was building this country after the Second World War, is absolutely right that Keir has set out, rebuilding this country after a pandemic, where it's patently clear that we did not fix the roof while the sun was shining before the pandemic, where austerity was wrong and where we now need to invest in British families and invest in British business. Very worrying, by the way, that it looks like the Chancellor's thinking of tax rises for struggling businesses during this time.
Well, we'll come to that next weekend. We're going to be doing a big budget special next weekend, I promise, and Labour's voice will be loudly heard then. But let me just move you on to one final quick question, and your dog's barking in the background, so he needs to go for a walk. But I know, Mr. Lammy, you're a big football fan. You were once kind enough to take me to a Tottenham Arsenal game at White Hart Lane. Of course, Tottenham had to win.
So I did, Tom.
You did, and you haven't let me forget it. But I just wanted to refer to Wilfred Zaha's comments this week. Wilfred Zaha, Crystal Palace winger, a black player, as you know. You're a very prominent black politician, of course. But he said something last week was quite striking. He said he's fed up of taking the knee. He said kneeling is now turning into empty gesture because nothing necessarily happens. So he's not going to take the knee anymore. He's just going to stand up from now onwards. Where do you stand on that? Is it still appropriate to take the knee? Do you still take the knee?
I do still take the knee. Look, if he's conveying the pain, the heartache, the tiredness behind those who do genuinely want to see Black Lives Matter in this country, i.e., they don't want a world in which, here in the UK, black women are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. They don't want a world in which there are still significant issues in our criminal justice system that I set out in the review that I did for David Cameron. If he's tired about that and he feels that taking the knee is not sufficient, I understand that. But I do think the bolder vision is about what more can we do to deal with structural racism and inequality in our country. Of course, there's more we can do. The pandemic demonstrates that. And I hope that right across the country, people feel that we now can come together and redouble our efforts.
Okay, Mr. Lammy, I'm sure we wish Arsenal good luck against Manchester City this afternoon.
Absolutely not. I want Spurs to beat West Ham very, very shortly. It's being described as a derby. Whenever Spurs play West Ham, it's not really a derby, is it?
Generous in spirit towards Arsenal, as always. David Lammy, Shadow Justice, thank you very much for joining us on G&T this morning.